The Ghost of Washington. It was Christmas morning, and John Riley was on his cycling tour through Pennsylvania. He had spent the previous night in a charming village and was now on his way to Valley Forge, a place rich in American history. He had a map, and Valley Forge was just a short distance away. As he cycled, Riley couldn't help but think about the soldiers who had marched through these same hills and fields over 125 years before, during the harsh winter of the Revolutionary War. The day was beautiful, and Riley enjoyed the scenery as much as he thought about his family back home, who would be gathered around a decorated Christmas tree at that very moment. He pedaled along the valley, passing quaint farmhouses, some of which had likely been standing since the time of the Revolution. Reaching a fork in the road, Riley wasn't sure which way to go. He spotted a house nearby and decided to ask for directions. He left his bicycle leaning against a gatepost and walked up the path towards the house. The house was old and run down, sitting in a field of overgrown grass. It was a single-story building with a large attic. As Riley got closer, he noticed the roof was damaged, the windows were missing, and cracks ran through the walls. The house looked abandoned. Still, Riley decided to take a look inside. The room he entered was dusty and empty, except for a rickety staircase leading up to the attic and a large fireplace. As he started up the stairs, he noticed something unusual on the hearth, a small, jug-shaped bottle. It was partly filled with a liquid that smelled strangely pleasant. Curious, Riley uncorked the bottle and took a sip. The liquid was surprisingly delicious. Suddenly, a strong hand gripped his shoulder, and a voice boomed in his ear. "Hello? Who are you? And what are you doing here? A spy, I presume." Riley was stunned. He had been completely alone in the house. He turned around to see 4 people standing in the room, 3 rough-looking men in strange, ragged clothes, and a woman, seemingly in the middle of washing clothes. The room itself had changed dramatically. The fireplace was now burning brightly, and the house looked newly repaired. The walls were clean, and the windows were in place. It was as if the house had been magically transformed. One of the men said, "Let's take him to headquarters." And without further explanation, the 3 men marched Riley out of the house and down to the road. He picked up his bicycle, and the men retrieved 3 muskets, which had not been there when he entered the house. Riley was completely baffled. The men seemed to be from another time, dressed like soldiers from the Revolutionary War. He also noticed they seemed completely unfamiliar with his bicycle. After a short walk, Riley and his captors arrived at a military encampment. Hundreds of soldiers, dressed in the same style as his captors, were gathered in tents and huts. There were muskets everywhere, and a battery of cannons was hidden in the trees. Riley was in the middle of an encampment from the 18th century. His captors led him to a large log house, where they were met by a dignified man, tall and straight, with a noble face. It was General George Washington. Riley was frozen with disbelief. He had seen countless pictures and statues of Washington, and he knew this was the real deal. Riley pinched himself to make sure he wasn't dreaming. He was in the presence of the legendary general. But how? He tried to make sense of the situation. He had felt perfectly normal until he drank from the bottle in the old house. It was clear there was something supernatural at play. Washington, sensing Riley's confusion, asked, "Who are you, sir?" "John Riley, at your service," Riley replied, then hesitantly added, "And who are you, sir?" Riley was immediately reprimanded by one of his captors. "It's not your place to question the general," he said. "It's not your place to be so rude," Riley retorted. Washington intervened, commanding his men to be quiet. He introduced himself to Riley, who was surprised by his friendly tone. Riley, confused by the day and year, asked Washington about the time. "It is Christmas Day," 1777, Washington replied. Riley pinched himself again. He was definitely not dreaming. Washington then turned to his men. "Why did you bring this man to me? Is he a spy?" Riley vehemently denied the accusation, but Harry, one of his captors, insisted, claiming they had found him in the Widow Robin's house drinking from a mysterious bottle. Washington, while skeptical, wanted to know if Riley was working for the British. Riley explained that he was just on a cycling tour and that he knew nothing about the war. He even told them that he had come from New York. Washington seemed skeptical of his explanation, especially since he had never seen a bicycle before. To prove his point, Riley jumped on his bike and rode around the square, maneuvering through the amazed soldiers. Even Washington had to jump out of the way to avoid being hit. The soldiers laughed at Riley's amazing invention, and Washington, impressed, wanted to learn more. One of the officers, however, scoffed at the bicycle, calling it a mere toy. Riley, feeling insulted, offered to race the officer on horseback. Washington, surprised by the proposition, agreed to the challenge. The soldiers gathered to watch the race. Riley lined up against Harry, who rode a beautiful black mare. As they waited for the starting signal, Harry taunted Riley, confident in his victory. The race began, and the horse immediately took the lead, leaving Riley in the dust. The crowd cheered, and Riley could hear the horse's hooves pounding on the ground behind him. Determined to win, Riley pushed himself harder and harder. The soldiers lining the road seemed to blur as Riley sped past them. He could feel the wind in his face and the dust filling his mouth and throat. But he continued to push himself, gradually gaining on the mare. Harry, surprised to find himself losing, lashed his horse furiously, but it couldn't match Riley's speed. The two were neck and neck, with Riley right behind the mare. As the finish line approached, Riley knew he had to make his final push. He gritted his teeth and pedaled harder than ever. Suddenly, Harry, in a fit of rage, swerved his horse towards Riley. Riley barely managed to avoid being trampled, swerving to the side just in time. The soldiers gasped, then erupted in anger at Harry's reckless move. Riley, unscathed, crossed the finish line, winning the race by a significant margin. As Riley finished the race, he saw Washington waving his hat in celebration. But as he slowed down, the cheering crowd vanished. The soldiers were gone, and the encampment was empty. The flag at the finish line had disappeared, and there was no sign of the army. The day was quiet, the wind had died down, and two sparrows chirped peacefully in a nearby tree. Riley returned to the old house where he had been captured. The house was in ruins again, and the bottle lay broken on the hearth. Riley realized that he was back in his own time, and that his encounter with Washington was a strange and inexplicable dream. The end. If you liked the story, hit that like button and subscribe for more videos. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Was there anything that surprised you? Who's your favorite character in the story? I can't wait to hear your thoughts.